Hey there, Eli coming at you again from Jose Coventry here today with another episode of Ecology with Eli. In our last video, we touched on the topic of symbiosis, and we talked about a lot of mutualistic symbioses, meaning that these relationships benefit both parties that are taking play. And today I wanted to kind of focus on some of the ways that symbiosis can still be considered with some relationships that might not be mutually beneficial to both parties. Again, our working definition of symbiosis really just refers to a relationship between two organisms that live within the same environment. So this relationship does not have to be beneficial to both parties. It does not have to be beneficial to either. And there are many circumstances in which it may benefit one and cause harm to another. So in this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit more about things such as parasitism and predation, and how these are also considered symbioses in the wild. So if you remember from our last video, we had this beautiful cleaner wrasse that we showed off cleaning off some of his fishy friends. And that relationship would be considered a mutual relationship because not only is that cleaner wrasse eating parasites off of the other fish, but that other fish is also actively being cleaned. So this benefits both parties that are involved. Again, I did touch on how sometimes it could be considered that it is more so benefiting the wrasse than it is the party being cleaned, because that wrasse might be eating scales, it might be eating slime coat, and it might be eating tissue off the larger fish. So in some ways, that relationship might also be considered a little more one-sided. However, generally it is still considered a mutualistic benefit. However, this relationship in itself also directly involves another symbiotic relationship. So for this cleaner wrasse to exist, for him to be able to clean parasites off of fish, these fish have to have parasites in the wild. So there are very many types and examples of different fish parasites, different fish illnesses. In the aquarium hobby, one of the most typical examples of that would be things like saltwater ick, cryptocarrion, or marine velvet, which are both protozoan parasites. These are small unicellular organisms, something that is very small, that feeds off of the slime coat, feeds off of the skin and the tissues of these animals. And it also includes some larger animals such as gill and skin flukes, which are something that that cleaner wrasse is aiming to clean off of those other fish. So although the existence of these parasites is not beneficial to their hosts, having gill flukes or having skin flukes on one of your fish in your aquarium is a very bad thing. It is something that a lot of fish can live with if it is a small enough infection, but it obviously does cause harm to the animal. So they will be drawing the blood, they will be eating tissues off of the surfaces, the skin, the scales, the gills of these fish, and overall are causing harm to the animal. However, this relationship is the only means of keeping those parasites alive. So it is much more important for that parasite to have a host, regardless of whether it's a willing host. For those parasites to exist, this relationship between that parasite and its host has to exist. So whereas that relationship is not really important to the larger animals, the host animals that are involved, without these host animals and without that relationship, things like gill flukes and other parasites would not be able to exist. If this is something that we run across in your aquarium, there are ways to work around it. Things like larger ectoparasites, like skin or gill flukes, can be controlled in an aquarium by using biological methods. Things like cleaner wrasse or cleaner shrimp are animals that will take advantage of that relationship, and they are exhibiting that mutualistic symbiosis that we mentioned in the last video, and they will take advantage of that and clean off those parasites from the fish. There are also options for medicine such as PrasiPro and some of your other meds that are available in the reefing hobby to take care of parasites in that manner. And then if you run into things like ick or velvet, keeping a UV sterilizer to kill those parasites as they are free floating in the water column, treating quarantine takes with meds like copper or formalin, and overall just benefiting the health of these animals, helps to promote the innate immunity of these fishes and maybe kick that infection on their own. However, these are just a given when it comes to wild animals. A wide majority of your saltwater fishes in specific do come from the wild. And just the nature of the aquarium setting, if there is an illness that you come in contact with in an aquarium, you are much more likely to spread it to your other tank inhabitants because of the space confines of the aquarium. So Unfortunately, parasitism is something that we do come across fairly frequently in the aquarium setting, but it is something that we can plan and work around in the hobby. Another example of symbiotic relationships that don't benefit both hosts would be the theory of predation. So there are a lot of animals, some that you might consider keystone species or apex predators. There are all sorts of different food webs in the wild, and some species, in order to survive, do eat the tissue of other animals. So when you get into the concept of predatory animals, such as this beautiful little fusilier I have behind me, although he's small at the moment, it is a larger predatory species of fish, something that takes advantage of there being smaller fish on the reefs and will prey upon smaller fishes, smaller shrimps, and invertebrates, and these are a staple part of its diet. You've even got some other animals that are very dietary specialists, so that is certainly an example of a symbiosis, is when you have an animal that's key diet comes down to feeding on a specific species or a specific type of other organism. You have things like lionfish that are often what they consider piscivores, which means that it eats mostly fish meat in the wild. They are preying mostly upon smaller fishes. And then you've got examples such as indigo hamlets, which is a Caribbean species of grouper. That's diet almost entirely consists of blue reef chromis, where that is a very specialized diet. This animal is kind of designed, kind of camouflaged to fit into these schools and take advantage of its coloration to almost strictly consume blue reef chromis. And even if we take into consideration some of your other types of animals, even mollusks, snails, and nudibranchs are a great example, with a lot of your nudibranchs and sea slugs being very strict dietary specialists. A lot of people are familiar with Bergia nudibranchs in the hobby, and this species is an example of one type of nudibranch that strictly eats Aptasia anemones, and if it runs out of Aptasia anemones, will actually starve. And those sort of relationships are a great example of the theory of predation and how that is a symbiotic relationship. So whereas the predator in those predator-prey interactions is always the one benefiting, it is actively consuming those smaller or different organisms, and it is directly deriving nutrition from eating these other animals or these other organisms. It is truly a relationship that without that secondary organism or without that prey involved, these larger predatory organisms would not be able to meet their caloric requirement and their dietary needs. So for that reason, this is also considered a symbiotic relationship, just because these two organisms are so intrinsically involved, regardless of whether both of them actually benefit from the relationship. Predation is certainly one example of a symbiosis that we run across very often in aquariums too. It's something worth keeping in mind, especially if you have a larger aquarium, that you do have to be quite picky about what animals you place with other animals. Placing something like a lionfish in with smaller fish like firefish, small clownfish, gobies, things of that nature is just not an appropriate pairing in an aquarium. Due to the predatory nature of those lionfish, it is not appropriate to house them with those smaller fishes because it is most likely that they will make a snack out of them. There are very many other examples of animals that probably wouldn't be the most appropriate. Oftentimes, angelfish, butterfly fish, parrotfish, things of that nature are active predators of corals or are predators of sponges and other invertebrates in the aquarium. So keeping that in mind when stocking your aquarium will help you in the long run if you do plan on having a mixed reef tank setting where you might have corals and fish side by side. Making sure that you don't have corallivores or animals that are predators of corals is an important way to making sure that you are not running into those issues. As always, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Ecology with Eli. I hope that you found this concept interesting. I hope that you found this expansion of the idea of symbiosis to be interesting. Again, a lot of times when we do consider symbiosis, we're really thinking of relationships between two animals that benefit both parties. But there are drastically many more examples of symbiosis that may not benefit both parties. They may harm one party and benefit the other, or they may benefit one without causing any sort of damage or benefit to the other. And I just find that really interesting. It's really a cool thing to be able to observe in your aquarium, is the way in which these animals or these organisms are going to interact with each other. And something that makes planning out your aquarium, planning out your aquascape, and your stock list for your aquarium much more interesting is to kind of see these relationships pan out, or to plan around it so that you don't have to deal with these issues such as predation or such as parasitism in your home aquarium. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Feel free to leave questions, comments, suggestions in the comment section below, and keep on reefing.